Good evening. Can you hear me in the gallery there? Yes, great. Good evening, councillors, members of the gallery, and to our viewers live streaming tonight's meeting. My name is Councillor Adam Pulford and I'm the Mayor of Merri-bek City Council and the chairperson for tonight's council meeting for planning and related matters. It's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's meeting. First up, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people, and we want to acknowledge them as traditional custodians of these lands and waterways and pay our respects to their elders past and present, as well as to all other First Nations community members who significantly contribute to the life of our city. This meeting is being recorded and web streamed live to Council's website and Facebook. This recording will also be available as video on demand. Gallery attendees are advised that they'll be recorded during the meeting. I also note that this meeting is being held during the election caretaker period. There are 4 items that will be considered tonight. The recommended decisions are not decisions prohibited by the Local Government Act and are decisions that fall within the guidance of Council's election period policy. Councillors, just a reminder that we must refrain from using this meeting for electioneering purposes or to speak about matters that can influence the outcome of the election. And a reminder that we will act in accordance with the Councillor Code of Conduct, which supports the principles of leadership and good governance that secures public confidence in the office of Councillor. In the event of emergency or disruption, we may be required to take action to ensure the safety of our attendees. For members of the gallery and councillors attending in person, please follow the directions issued by council staff and security officers. Thank you for your understanding and cooperation. Oscar, we might just need you to mute yourself because I can kind of hear a bit of an echo, if that's okay. Councillor Yudis, sorry. I'd like to introduce the other councillors in attendance tonight. We've got Councillor Angelica Panopoulos.
Hi, everyone.
Councillor Mark Riley.
Evening.
Councillor Monica Hart.
Hello, everyone.
And Councillor Sue Bolton. We're grateful to Councillor Yildiz, who's joining us online.
I can barely hear you, Adam.
Okay. Thanks, Oscar. If the IT team could just check online volumes. But yeah, we're grateful to Councillor Yildiz for joining us this evening when he was going to be an apology, but he's come back to help us make quorum, so thank you. I'd also like to introduce Phil Priest, who's the Group Manager of City Development. We have members of our urban planning team, members of our governance team, and that's all the introductions. On to apologies. We have had apologies from a number of councillors. Councillor Carly Hannon, Councillor Davidson and Councillor Pavlidis are all apologies for this evening. We'll now move on to the disclosures of conflicts of interest. So on the 4 items on tonight's agenda, councillors, are there any conflicts of interest to declare? Great. Item number 4 is the confirmation of minutes of previous meetings. Could I please have a motion for the confirmation of the minutes for the council meeting for planning and related matters held on 25th September? Okay, Councillor Panopoulos to move, Councillor Riley to second. All those in favour? I declare that carried. So before we get onto the items themselves, I'll just give an outline of how this will run. For the items in relation to planning permit applications, the relevant planner will introduce the report and the officer recommendations. The objectors will then have an opportunity to make a submission, and then after this, the applicant will be given the opportunity to speak. If you're making a submission, please clearly state your name for the record. If you are requested to present viewpoints clearly and concisely on why you support or oppose a planning application. Please don't repeat what earlier speakers have said and keep the discussion focused on relevant issues and points not previously raised. If you're opposed, please inform the meeting why you're opposed and suggest an alternative approach. Please use this opportunity to focus on your concerns rather than matters of detail in the officer's report. Please note there's a limit of 3 minutes for each objector and the permit applicant. So as I said earlier, we are in caretaker. We have 4 reports this evening, the recommended decisions of which are not decisions prohibited by the Act and they fall within our election period policy. We're on to the first one. So 5.1, which is 170 The Avenue, Coburg. And I'll ask Mark Hughes, the Unit Manager of Urban Planning, to present the report.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. My audio is okay?
No. Is the green light on?
The green light's on?
Yeah, you can. No.
No.
Sorry. Can the gallery hear Mark when he's talking? No.
Testing? No? Yes? Mike's on
No,
green?
no. They're getting some nods and some shakes. So, comms team or iTeam team, can you just check the volume levels in the gallery?
Okay, yeah, I'm here to present 170 The Avenue, Coburg.
Okay, it sounds like it's good.
Beautiful, all right.
Sorry, go
Thank
ahead.
you. I just wanted to check that before I went too far. So thank you, Mayor, and thank you, councillors. I'm presenting the item for 170 The Avenue in Coburg, where planning permission is sought to construct 5 dwellings and to remove vegetation from the site. The site is at the end of the avenue, and the eastern boundary has an abuttal to the Merri Creek. You can see in the images there is clearly parkland and the creek corridor to the east. There's a whole lot of residential houses and dwellings to the west, and there are some larger townhouse apartment buildings to the north and south of the site. The planning controls are a little bit unique, where the site is in 2 zones. So most of the site is in the neighbourhood residential zone, but the rear portion or the eastern portion of the site is in a public park and recreation zone. There are a number of overlays. Some of those overlays trigger a mandatory referral to Melbourne Water. In detail, the overlays are the special building overlay, erosion management overlay, land subject inundation overlay, environmental significance overlay, and this is also an area identified for Aboriginal cultural heritage sensitivity. In this area, the policy setting is seeking minimal change or minimal housing growth, so that generally means housing development no more than 2 stories in height. There is some history for this site. There was a planning permit that was refused by the then Urban Planning Committee in April 2015. One of the things to note with that approval was there was a setback imposed by Melbourne Water, who took a 20-metre setback from the centre line of the creek, and that becomes relevant when we get into the detail of the officer recommendation. There was also conditions imposed regarding a Section 173 agreement, which was transferring some of the land to council to continue that open space corridor, and that agreement has been entered into and is part of the certificate of title. This proposal is seeking the construction of 5 double-storey dwellings. They're all 4 bedrooms, all have 2 car parking spaces and all have ground level open space, and the proposal seeks to remove all non-Indigenous trees from the site. There was a lot of objections received, around about 300, 10 have been withdrawn. Some of the main issues raised relate to the fence line blocking a path which runs along the Merri Creek, setbacks from the Merri Creek and parklands, the transfer of the embankment to council, loss of vegetation and habitat, and there was a planning and information discussion meeting held on the 12th of September of this year. The key considerations for this proposal relates to the response to the Merri Creek corridor, community benefit related to the transfer of land to council to improve the green open space corridor, off-site impacts that covers things like overlooking, overshadowing, tree removal and landscaping, and some of the detailed design. The officer recommendation, or the recommendation in tonight's agenda, is the issuing of a notice of decision to grant a planning permit. Some of the key conditions is the condition around the embankment still being transferred to council, but an update to the legal agreement to reference this planning permit. There's been the deletion of the fence which was drawn in error along the Merri Creek path. There's been an increase in the rear setbacks in the order of 20 metres as required by Melbourne Water, and there's some detailed landscaping and vegetation or revegetation proposed for that open space buffer which will be transferred to council. Right, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. We have 7 objectors who've indicated they wish to speak. So first up, we have Frank Baioletti.
Okay. I only live about 200 metres approximately from this location. First thing I noticed looking at the drawings is the big impact on the trail. It'll be basically, you'll only get the morning sun, so the overshadowing of the 2-storey structure will have a big impact. And because of the slope, it will appear like a 4-storey building. And the fall, I don't know if it's about 12 metres approximately from the avenue to the creek. And the other thing to take in note is that's the narrowest part of the Merri Creek Trail, anywhere from Brunswick to Coburg north. And therefore, the land which has been transferred, I feel, is inadequate. It should be larger to add that environmental space for the wildlife. And at the moment, there's only 2 large pine trees, and which creates habitat, important habitat, because we can just walk into the air conditioning building in our long summers that we're getting. They're starting before spring, and the birds can't do that, wildlife can't do that. So they need these trees to remain and other vegetation planted to stabilise the banks and landsliding. And the other issue, so that with the current transfer of land, I think only the small pine tree, 10 metres high, is retained because that's on council property. But but that's got basically minimal limbs. So the most important tree is the larger, more mature one, 13 metres high, and that does not affect the construction of the proposal. The other issue which I raised in my objection is setbacks, but it looks like they've had a second go, and because it needs to be in alignment with the buildings north and south. Initially, they weren't in alignment. And the other crucial setback, which would help the overshadowing, is if the second storey is set further back in towards the west boundary, that would have less impact on the overshadowing. What else do I have to raise? There was mention of cut and fill. I'm not sure if that's still going ahead, and that will damage, due to it's in a landslide area, flood inundation, so it's inappropriate for cut and fill to happen in that location. And visually, the character of the Merri Creek, if that goes ahead, it's basically 10 metres tall, and from the west boundary all across to the north boundary, it's like a curved building, it's 50 metres in length. So that'll have a big impact, especially if those 2 mature trees are removed.
So
And
Frank, you've spoken, you're just over time now, so if you could just conclude, please.
Okay, so summing up, I'd say architecturally, they haven't tried to blend into the environment and basically reduce the enormous impact of the massive building when you take into the fallen land, the height and the overall width. The architectural design hasn't looked at that at all.
Thank you, Frank.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So the next objector we have is Peter Mollison. Peter.
I'm not sure what the sequence of other speakers is, but I'm sort of tag teaming with Anne McGregor, so I'm
Would you like Anne to go first, or?
it might be better if Anne went
Yeah,
first.
that's fine. Yep. So we'll have Anne McGregor, and then we'll have Peter. And just so people know the order that we've got on our sheet, and we can mix that around, we've got Gabrielle. So we'll have Anne, Peter, Gabrielle, Polly, Yasmin, and Robert. So if there's any issues, let me know. Anne.
Good evening, councillors. My name's Anne McGregor. I'm representing Friends of Merri Creek Incorporated this evening. Our objection was made to the advertising, and we shared the alarm of a lot of local residents that the creekside open space, the public lost.
Sorry, Anne, can you put the mic down a little bit closer to your mouth and just, if you can, speak up a little bit?
Yep, okay. Moreover, the development plans virtually ignored the Merri Creek. They certainly didn't respond to the development guidelines for Merri Creek, which is a reference document in the planning scheme. So we weren't at all impressed with the plans, but we did participate in a rather complicated and at times confusing process where alternative plans were distributed to objectors that changed the proposal and included the proposed land transfer to create a public link along the creek frontage. And we've since tried to negotiate with the proponent and through council officers to reach some resolution about the best outcome, but we haven't had much success there. We remain concerned about the inaccuracy and uncertainties of the current plans, as we've only seen them very recently, and the changes that have resulted along the way. This is a really strategically important part of the Merri Creek corridor, as Frank was saying. It's very narrow. In fact, in the Merri-bek planning scheme, the policy is to achieve a 50-metre wide setback of public open space along the waterways, and this proposal certainly would get nowhere near that. Our objectives are to try and create a wider public open space corridor and to minimise visual impacts on the creek corridor. Key benefits of a wider open space, wider transfer of land to the council along the creek frontage include obviously guaranteed public access and space for revegetation and habitat creation for local birds and other wildlife. So generally improving the environmental values of that area. So, as I said, we attempted to negotiate a wider open space land contribution, but we regretfully accept that the proponent is not wanting to comply with that request. So tonight we're asking that if council decides to grant a notice of decision to approve a permit, we're asking for two changes. First is that the top level of dwellings facing the creek be set back by no less than an average of 2.8 metres to reduce the shadows cast by the buildings and to reduce the visual bulk and impacts on the creek parklands and people walking along the creek there. And the second request is that, as Frank mentioned, the two big pine trees, Pinus radiata, which are on the southern boundary of the property, trees 5 and 6 in the plans, be retained as a condition of the permit as important mature trees and with significant habitat value.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. And yes, Peter.
Peter Mollison, representing Friends of Merri Creek, and I've been involved in a group that was involved with Anne and others to deal with council. I want to deal with a couple of issues about this process. First is errors in information, and then secondly I want to talk a bit about better integration between open space planning and planning scheme processes and permit applications. So objectors have been troubled by the significant errors in information, in plans and diagrams during this application. The biggest was the advertised plans which did not implement the Section 173 agreement land transfer. Another is shadow diagrams for the advertised proposal and for the current sketch plan version. Both include a significant understatement of the shading caused at the 3 p.m. equinox. In the first case, the reason for the understatement was that the slope of the land hadn't been taken into account. And in the second version, we checked it and it would appear that the altitude of the sun, in other words, the angle of the sun, was the incorrect angle. It was a higher angle than the angle you'd have at 3 p.m. on the spring equinox. We independently checked the latest diagrams, Fortunately, we had the assistance of somebody with architectural skills who could do this properly. These errors have put pressure on objectors to test the information and correct it. So turning to the issue of integration with park planning, this application has highlighted the need for better cooperation and integration between council, park planning, open space planning and planning scheme processes and decisions. There are a number of places like this one where waterway corridors are narrow and should be widened by strategic acquisitions or open space land contributions. Council should work to implement the recently adopted Merri-bek Open Space Strategy 2024 and plan to fix these narrow corridor issues in a proactive way rather than the sort of rather muddled process we've seen in this case. This may involve changes to the planning scheme and to the way waterway corridor issues are dealt with between the statutory planning team and the open space planners in council. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Peter. Next up, we have Gabrielle.
Good evening. How's that volume?
It's good for us and
Thank you.
good out there. Yeah.
Thank you to Merri-bek Council for providing a forum for the community on this matter. Thank you to First Nations peoples who have cared for this sacred waterway for millennia. Thank you to Merri Creek Management Committee for fighting to retain this waterway and for their vision and care of habitat. The Merri Creek deserves our respect. More than ever, our precious green spaces are in high demand. As humans on the planet, it is our responsibility to care for the creek in future years. 170 The Avenue is a wonderful location with frontage of the Merri. Much work has gone into establishing a corridor of native plants along the creek. This provides habitat, respite, ecosystem, and serenity for creatures and humans. The development of 170 The Avenue is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to create a wider corridor, a safer path, increased planting. We saw during COVID lockdowns the importance of this sacred space. The owner has a right to build dwellings on their land, no question. But I ask, please consider the health of the creek and the ecosystem. Please retain the few remaining old pine trees. They are not native, but they provide habitat, nesting hollows and protection for creatures, yellow-tailed black cockatoos and collared sparrowhawks, very rare birds. Please do not build so that the creek is in shadow from 3 p.m. Please consider architect-designed mixed-size dwellings with green credentials. Yes, it will cost more, but such homes will be of greater value. Look at the Nightingale Apartments, for instance. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to build in harmony with nature, to invite nature in, not to turn your back on nature. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabrielle. Next up, we have Polly Bastow. Welcome.
Evening, councillors. I wasn't allowed to do a PowerPoint. My name's Polly Bastow, I've walked around the Merri Creek every morning for the last 20 years or so, and I have a lot of love and respect for this creek. I'm also an architect, and on seeing the application drawings, I was concerned that this much-loved walking track would be shaded by the new development. On checking the shadow diagrams, I notified planning that they were inaccurate, and the planners agreed. The applicant has since redrawn the shadow diagrams. However, they are still not correct for the 23rd of September at 3 p.m. The applicant's diagram, which is on that handout I've given, shows the 3 p.m. shadows falling at 45 degrees, not 36 degrees as stipulated by the CSIRO. If we were to project that 36-degree angle down from the section drawn in red on the applicant's diagram, it shows that the path will be in shadow at 3 p.m. for half the year. This is a very poor design outcome for the creek. Happily, this overshadowing could easily be resolved by setting the top floor of units 2 and 3 back by 2.8 metres to make a balcony similar to the neighbouring development to the south at Berg Place. This would also reduce visual bulk. As an architect who has made a fair few planning applications, I would also like to query how a town planning application can be adjudicated properly without a current set of elevations available. I'd like to end with this image from Gabriel Poundset's beautiful photo of yellow-tailed black cockatoos up the top of the trees 5 and 6 on site. Please don't let these trees be cut down. But I should add that in the original application, they weren't to be cut down. In the original application, they're going to be kept, and now they're going to be cut down. So if all we get from this meeting is that they don't cut down those trees, they weren't going to cut them down originally anyway. So please don't fall for the gimme.
Thank you. Thanks, Polly. Next up, we have Yasmin Kelso on behalf of the Merri Creek Management Committee.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Yasmin Kelsall. I'm the Environmental Planning Lead at the Merri Creek Management Committee, a new position. So we've had a relatively long involvement with this application since its beginning. In response to this current development proposal, we lodged an objection, and that still stands. Our objection was largely in response to the lack of the application response to the Merri Creek Development Guidelines, as outlined earlier by Anne. We very much are very supportive of seeing continuous open public space along the Merri Creek. These are elements that are also reflected in different parts of the Merri-bek planning scheme. That includes within open space policies, as mentioned also by Anne, 50-metre buffer from each side of the Merri Creek corridor is aspired to in the open space policy. The Merri Creek Development Guidelines ask for a 30-metre distance from the top of the creek bank, and also they require a 12-metre setback from the top of any batters, and these are not reflected in the current development proposal. We very much asked for a much stronger response to the guidelines, and that hasn't been proposed at all. So we would like to also highlight the importance of this part of the creek, not wanting to really take out and highlight any particular part of the creek in preference to others, but those 300 objections, really do help to show how beloved the creek is to the local community. As mentioned, it's a very narrow part of the creek, and the walking track is really, salvation to a lot of people. It's enjoyed by so many people, and the positioning of this particular block makes it and the narrowness of the creek makes it quite, really, what goes on in this block will be very visual to a lot of people, and, really. So we also note the bulking issues that are still...
Sorry, Yasmin, if you could come to your concluding remarks.
Sure. We'd like to also ask that if council decides to recommend to grant a notice of decision, we also ask for the top level of the dwellings to be set back by 2.8 metres. And we also would like to reiterate the retention of trees 5 and 6. Thanks.
Thank you, Yasmin. And up next we have Robert Smith.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me? I'm a bit messy. I had to come straight from work to be here, so sorry about my appearance. I mean, everyone else is wearing suits and stuff, so. I guess I feel like this is a pretty black and white kind of issue as someone who lives in Coburg and enjoys the creek and has been here for a few years. It feels like there's a line in the sand where do we choose for its dwellings to be built, or do we choose more space for plants, wildlife, animals, birds that have already lost so much? I think that's the context that I'm coming at this from. We think about what's happened since colonization began. Europeans have drastically altered the way this land looks. It's inconceivable for us today to really kind of conceptualize that, but that's what we know from history and the science. And that's our shared reality that we're in, like it or not. So we have the opportunity to work in a way that sort of aids these species to proliferate, to for these species to proliferate and to do well, to thrive. I mean, arguably, it's one house, it's one area of houses, dwellings. What damage can that really do to the ecosystem? What damage can that really do to the environment? But I think it's more like this is a precedent, because if we draw a line here, like, why not another house that backs onto the creek in a year or so? Why not more? We need to be clear about what our values are as a community. And if Merri-bek is serious about creating a greener city, a greener environment, that seems like the obvious choice to me. I'll just finish by mentioning I hang out a bit down the creek, and there's some beautiful bird life. We've got the sacred kingfisher who migrates from New Guinea and Indonesia, specifically to the Merri Creek for breeding season over the warmer months. We've got the rufous songlark, migrates from northern Australia. These are the beautiful species that we have in our environment, and we need to do what we can to protect what they have left after losing so much. Thanks.
Thank you. So next up we have a supporter who's indicated they wish to speak. We've got Asanka Eppa.
Okay, hi. So I'd like to start off with noting, as I usually do, that this will be 5 more dwellings in a well-serviced suburb, in this case near open space. It's usually the case that people bring up open space as a reason against development, but I think in this case that there's going to be more housing with great access to open space is actually a really good reason to support this. A lot of the development that takes place in Merri-bek sadly isn't that close to green space, and this is really good proposal, I think. So there's already in this location townhouses and apartments both to the south and to the north of this development site. So I'm confused exactly what about this site in particular is so terrible that we should ensure that we have 5 less dwellings in the municipality. The officers support it. It's in compliance with the planning scheme, as far as I can see. And really, I think in the last planning meeting of council, I know there's been a lot of objections to this one, but I don't think council should finish off its term by rejecting dwellings in a good suburb with good infrastructure near parkland that does comply with the planning scheme.
Thank you, Asanka. We now have the permit applicant or their representative, Philip Regal, joining us. Philip.
Good evening, councillors, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. Just want to check, first of all, that you can hear me okay?
Yes, all good.
Yes, thank you. So we've obviously heard from a number of submissions this evening, and it's clear that this is a sensitive topic for a number of people. What we would say to the council is that the current application that is before you is a proposal that is a significantly reduced down version of a residential development. That you would have heard that there's been 2 previous permits issued for the site. Most recently, a development of 15 dwellings of 3-storey form. And what's before you are 5 dwellings of 2-storey form with significantly reduced footprint. The other point we'd want to make is that with the most recent Melbourne water requirements, the setback of the buildings from the creek have significantly increased as well over and above the previous permits. So the previous setback of the 3-storey form was 20 metres to the centre line of the creek. We now have a requirement for a setback of 20 metres to the eastern boundary, which essentially means an over 25 metre setback to the creek centre line. So in that respect, we say this is a significantly reduced proposal to what's been previously approved, and in its own right represents a level of change that we say is completely acceptable and reasonable for a site of this size, which is over 1,800 square metres and has access to a number of services and amenities, including the creek corridor. We understand and appreciate there's been a lot of objections. It'd be fair to say that most of the concerns raised initially relate to some inaccuracies on the plans. They've since been addressed, and we note that there is no intention of the applicant to fence off the walkway or the creek. And in fact, as you'll be aware, the proposal will provide for the provision of 460 square metres of land to be vested to council at no cost. And that equates to approximately 25% of the subject site area. So we're not talking about a small piece of land. It's a large parcel that, subject to a permit issuing and the development commencing, that land will be vested to council. The other point we'd make in that respect is that prior to that land being vested, the applicant will be liable and responsible for the landscaping of that space, the stabilisation of that space, and it would then be vested to council at no cost. So we say there is a significant and considerable net community benefit to be had for this permit to issue. If a permit doesn't issue, the land will remain in private ownership. So there is a real significant reason for a permit to issue. I'm conscious of time. I've had a few other things to say. If I can quickly respond to a couple of matters. In terms of the overshadowing, the project architects have prepared plans which show that the amended design in the sketch plans will significantly reduce overshadowing. We don't believe that an additional upper level setback as proposed of 2.8 metres is necessary. And we certainly note that council officers are of the same view. They're not requiring any additional setback. One last point, there's been comments around trees 5 and 6. We note that the applicant has no intention to remove those trees. They can be retained, but they're within the land to be vested to council should a permit issue, and they can easily be retained within that land area.
Thanks, Philip. Councillors, are there any questions for the applicant? Yep, Councillor Hart.
Yeah, thanks very much, Philip, for that overview. Philip, in terms of, I just heard the comment in terms of the fact that the community have been talking about the 2.8 metres, and you were saying the applicant isn't interested in addressing that. My question is more, is it feasible? Is it possible? What would be the impact?
Thank you. So yes, look, this question was raised. We've had a couple of meetings and discussions with the objectors, including some of those that spoke this evening. So there's a couple of issues in respect to that. Firstly, other than the fact that we consider it not necessary, it would have a significant impact on the design of the building. It would require a redesign, and it would require, most likely require, a loss of a number of bedrooms associated with each of the dwellings. Now, one might say that, they're already in 3 and 4 bedroom dwellings, but this is a project that you can imagine has a long history. It's not easy or cheap, if I can put it that way, to build on this site because of the significant issues around the provision of that extra land. So what we would say in that respect is, firstly, it's not required. We don't believe it's going to have a significant benefit in terms of the visual bulk impacts of the proposal. It's a 2-storey form. It's going to be set back 20 metres from the current eastern title boundary. There is a condition in the permit we note also that requires that the materiality of the upper level be revised to the satisfaction of council to reduce the amount of render. So we think that there's sufficient articulation provided in the setbacks and through the conditions that council officers have recommended to address any concerns regarding the visual bulk of the development. And in respect to overshadowing, I rely on the shadow plans prepared by the project architect, which show that at 3 p.m. The overshadowing is reasonable and it's not going to significantly impact that existing pathway.
Thanks, Philip. Any final questions from councillors? Okay. Sorry, Councillor Panopoulos.
It's just for Mark, if that's okay. Sorry, not the applicant. It's just about the setback ? So if council were to pass that for the top floor, I'm just wondering, would it stack up at VCAT? Because I know often we talk about, I guess the balance with pushing things to VCAT. So I'm just wondering, is there any precedent for that level of setback, or what would VCAT rely on likely to make their own decision?
Thank you, Councillor, and through the Mayor. Hopefully I've captured your question correctly, so pull me up if I'm going in the wrong direction. So the 20-metre setback, firstly, is required by Melbourne Water, who is a determining authority. So council has to impose the 20-metre setback. If we find ourselves at VCAT or the tribunal has different powers to council, and the tribunal can choose not to require that 20-metre setback. So there is a risk, if it goes to the tribunal, that the 20-metre setback could be lost, and it'll be up to Melbourne Water to defend that condition at the tribunal. The viability of the project is not for me to answer. I think the permit applicant has made some statements, but if we further increase it, there's a risk that we could go to the tribunal because the proposal needs such a big redesign. But I don't know if that's true or not, but...
Thanks.
Great. Okay, sorry, Councillor. Oh, okay, yeah. All right, thank you, Philip. We'll probably boot you out of the Zoom room, but you can follow along on the live stream at home. So, Councillor Bolton, you're indicating you've got a motion? Yeah. So would I just ask what you're moving?
I've got a resolution which has 4 conditions on it. One includes a 20-metre setback, which is the Melbourne Water requirement. The second is 1P, which increases the upper level eastern setback by 2.8 metres. Then a new condition 1Q to retain the trees 5 and 6, the radiata pines. And lastly, amend condition 8 to extend the tree root protection zone to trees 5 and 6. If I've got a seconder, I will explain why I'm moving the motion.
Councillors, is there a seconder for Councillor Hart to second Councillor Bolton?
So, since I became aware of this new application, well, firstly, I became aware because of the mistake in the original plans which resulted in 300 objections to the proposal. But then, I had some concerns about this particular area because of the narrowness and steepness of the area. But then I was considering, whether or not this might be a risk with VCAT to move a motion such as this to increase the upper level setback. But I feel that given the inaccuracy of the shadow drawings and the fact that the slope of the land makes the shadows much much larger and longer than a 2-storey shadow would on a flat or land with only a low slope, that I feel that it is important to push for a 2.8 metre upper level setback, because I think that those two arguments are very important, and I think the fact that while the shadow drawings have been corrected, there's still an inaccuracy in the shadow diagrams, and that to me means that I think we should change, increase the setback for the upper levels. I definitely support the retention of the trees. I suspect there's not much argument about that. These are trees that are used for nesting, so they are actually providing significant wildlife habitat. But I think there is a good argument for the upper level setback. I know the applicant has basically said no, and it is clearly the whole overall proposal is better than the previous one, but I'm convinced by the arguments about the shadowing, and especially when you really look at the slope of the land and the narrowness of the creek corridor at this particular point. If it was a much wider creek corridor at that point, I might not have the same objection, but I think the slope of the land and the narrowness of the creek corridor makes me think it is important to actually try and gain an extra upper level setback.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Councillor Hart.
Serve my right to speak. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hart. Do any other councillors wish to speak to this item? I'm happy to speak against. So, thank you everybody for coming along and your engagement in this, and particularly the 300 community members who participated and objected when the first drawings were circulated that showed the path being cut off. I think it's really important that community members speak up, and then officers and the applicant were able to correct that, and then we went quite a lot deeper into the detail, and I was pleased to meet with some of the residents and council officers in the lead up to this meeting tonight, and I know that there's been a lot of engagement between volunteers and residents who are very protective of the Merri Creek, and rightfully so, and planning officers and the applicant. So the reason I'm going to vote against this, and I'd foreshadow I'd foreshadow an alternative which doesn't include the 2.8 metre setback, but does retain the 5 and 6 trees, because we've heard tonight how important those trees are to native wildlife, and we've heard from the applicant that it will be on public land if this permit goes ahead, and that they can easily be retained, and that's a smart thing to do. It's always a dance when we are meeting as a council, as a statutory body, making decisions on planning matters. When we make decisions on other matters, we can kind of set the bar high, and we can, always aim to reach that bar because things are within our control. But when it comes to planning, we are so constrained with our power here that it does become a dance that and if you kind of push too hard one way, there's a risk that the benefits that our officers and have negotiated with the applicant, like the handback of the land to the public, and like the change of materials at the top, they could be lost at VCAT when if it's challenged by the applicant. So, you sit here as a decision maker in the planning with your planning hat on, and you agree with a lot of what you're hearing, but then you realise that if you do push it a bit too far, there's a chance it goes to VCAT, and then some other positive gains are lost. And I feel like given there was a previous VCAT approval for this site, which had 3 stories rather than 2 stories, and it was closer to the boundary and much closer to the creek than this proposal, there's some uncertainty there about whether if we pushed the 2.8 metre extra setback at the top level, whether it's the Melbourne Water new position around measuring from the creek bank rather than the middle of the creek would come under scrutiny. And there's a risk there that we lose that, and then the development is actually even closer to the boundary, which then even overshadows the creek more and can be seen from the creek more. So, yeah, I won't support this, but I would support retaining those 2 important trees. That's the end of my contribution, sorry. Run out of time. Any other councillors wish to speak for or against this motion? Yeah, Councillor Hart.
Thank you. Thank you to the community. Thank you to, on behalf of the applicant. And I think, even though someone said this, I don't think council tonight is looking at a refusal. What we're looking at in the 2 issues are obviously around trees 5 and 6, and the question of the extension of the setback by the 2.8 metres, which has been put forward by the community and rejected by the applicant. I hear the arguments about the difficulty and the risk, and I certainly do note from what you've said tonight, Philip, that this is a far stronger and a better development than what previously had been put forward. I certainly recognise that. I guess what concerns me and will influence how I vote is that there has been a number of errors previously that have all needed to be addressed, and it concerns me that I'm still hearing tonight that there are some concerns with those shadow diagrams and the impact on the Merri Creek Trail. So I think that does influence my vote tonight. I would find it difficult to support it knowing that there is concerns about the diagrams. I very validly hear the concerns of some councillors in terms of what could be a risk at VCAT, yet I also find it difficult to accept something knowing that there's an element of error in it. So I will support the amendment on that basis. And thank you very much to all the work from the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hart. Do any other councillors wish to speak to this item? Councillor Bolton, do you want your right of reply?
Just a quick summation of it. I feel, I don't have a lot new to add, but I think the fact that the sun angle of the most recent diagram provided by the applicant is taken from the wrong angle, which then indicates lesser shadow than will would actually be the case if it was taken from the right angle, I think is something we do have to take into account in making our decision. Yes, I agree with the risks. There's always a risk with VCAT, with any of the developments we approve or oppose or reject. But I think, that error plus the actual, the environment of that particular section of the creek, I think those are the two strongest arguments, which mean that I'm still would urge councillors to consider voting for this amendment. Now, maybe if there weren't all of these errors, if the creek wasn't as narrow, the creek corridor wasn't as narrow at this point, I might give it the development the benefit of the doubt. But I can't. I can't do that, and I think I might vote against the entire thing if this amendment goes down.
Thanks, Councillor Bolton. We're just going to have to briefly adjourn the meeting as we're not quorate at the moment. We are. Sorry. All good. We don't have to adjourn the meeting. Okay, so we'll now move on to a vote on that. So all those in favour of this? Yep. Okay, so all those against? And any abstentions? Okay, I declare that lost. So I foreshadowed an alternative, which was to retain trees 5 and 6. So we'll just make sure that one is projected, and I'll see if I have a seconder.
I'll second it.
Okay, great. All right. So if we can start the timer. Look, I don't need to repeat the arguments. We don't have power to enforce less overshadowing of that path, which is why we didn't support the previous one. So this one, I guess, is the less risky, banks the wins that officers have been able to negotiate, and given the time passed from the previous permit to this permit and the differences in that it's 2 stories rather than 3, and it's further back from the creek, I think we should bank those wins. It's a better outcome than what had been approved previously, and it's a block of land that has development kind of either side of it, so it's not a new area of the creek. If we were starting somewhere new, we would have more power to actually force all development to happen further away from the creek. But this is kind of an established corridor, and it's really concerning that in the previously blocks of land were drawn literally to the creek boundary, and that's why we're in the situation that we find ourselves in. When land was originally subdivided, after colonisation and coming in and drawing up these blocks, the land actually went to the creek. So this buffer is good. It's not as big as the community wants, as council itself actually wants, but when you're looking at established areas where there's development either side, we don't have the power to kind of enforce the further setback. Anyway, I've said that enough. So moving this, and Councillor Panopoulos, if you'd like to.
Actually, I don't have anything new to add, to be honest.
Sure, so you reserve your right. Do any other councillors wish to? Yeah, Councillor Riley.
Yeah, look, I'll just briefly speak. Thanks, Mayor. I really thank all the objectors this evening for their contributions, and I wouldn't expect anything less really in terms of the call for the setbacks and all of the things that people have been asking tonight, and I think that's really important, and thank people for doing that. However, I do believe this is a fine line, and given the costs that are going to be met in terms of the transfer or the vesting of land to the public, which will come to council to care for, and the fact that it's going to have to be landscaped and erosion measures taken and so on, and all of that put in place, I think losing some, well, perhaps not losing that, but losing some of the other advantages that have been brought with this by going to the cost of VCAT. What we see is that the applicant will probably take it to VCAT, but they won't just seek to change some of the things that that we might think they're going to do. They'll likely try and seek more benefit for the cost of having to go to VCAT. And this is the dance that the Mayor referred to before. I just think it's too tricky at this point to be doing that, and I really wish we could do many of the things that you're asking for, but we do need to acquire the properties to the north and south, and we can't take that land. We have to have it offered to us. There needs to be different laws for that, and we also need more funds to be able to do that. So whilst I agree with the vision, executing it and getting that started is going to be very difficult, but thank everyone for their advocacy on this in any case.
Thanks, Councillor Riley. Do any other councillors wish to speak to this motion? We might move to a vote then. All those in favour? All those against? Okay, I can declare that carried. We'll move on to, we'll hear from Mark about the next steps in this application.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. Council's resolved to issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit at 170 The Avenue for the construction of dwellings and removal of vegetation. That notice will be sent to all objectors who have a 28-day period in which to lodge any reviews at VCAT. The permit applicant has 60 days to lodge any appeal against conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. We are now on to the second item on our agenda. Item 5.2, 38 Harrison Street, Brunswick East. I'll now ask Ariadne Hasiotis, sorry, that's a terrible pronunciation of your name, the Senior Urban Planner, to present the report. And could you tell me how to pronounce your name?
Thank you, Mayor. It's Ariadne, or Ari for short. Yeah. Good evening, councillors and gallery. This matter relates to an application at 38 Harrison Street, Brunswick East. The proposal is for partial demolition, including alterations and additions to the existing dwelling, demolition of existing outbuildings and reconstruction of one outbuilding, construction of 6 dwellings, reduction to the car parking requirement, and removal of vegetation. As shown on the screen, the site has a frontage to Harrison Street and an interface with the Merri-bek to the east. To the north is a 4-storey apartment building, and to the south is a church. Currently on the site is a heritage dwelling and 4 outbuildings. There are several trees across the site, including a mature Moreton Bay fig tree towards the southern boundary and a drooping she oak tree towards the northern boundary. The site is in a neighbourhood residential zone, and the overlays which affect the site are the Heritage Overlay Schedule 90, which specifically relates to 38 Harrison Street cottage and outbuildings, the Design and Development Overlay, Environmental Significance Overlay, and Land Subject to Inundation Overlay. The site is in an area designated for minimal housing growth, and strategic policy seeks developments within these areas to provide an acceptable level of change and to contribute to a low-density, open and landscaped character. The proposal includes partial demolition and restoration of the existing heritage dwelling fronting Harrison Street, demolition of 3 outbuildings which are located within the rear setback of the site, reconstruction and relocation of 1 outbuilding, the cool room, is to be repositioned beside the retained heritage dwelling. Construction of 6 dwellings, 1 double-storey and 5 triple-storey, to the rear of the site. Removal of 6 trees and retention of 6 trees. 7 car parking spaces are proposed and 9 bicycle spaces. Public notice of the application was undertaken and 21 objections were received. An objector map is shown on the screen. The main issues raised in the objections were loss of vegetation and impact on the Merri-bek, impact on heritage values, building height, scale and setbacks. And a planning information and discussion meeting was held in October. Key considerations include that the proposal responds to the Merri Creek corridor interface through appropriate design, massing, scale and setbacks of built form to limit visual impact of the development from the Merri Creek, and incorporates a substantial vegetative landscaping buffer in the rear setback, including Indigenous species. Off-site amenity impacts have been assessed, and the development demonstrates compliance with standards for daylight to habitable room windows to the apartments to the north, no overshadowing or overlooking to any areas of secluded private open space, and the development complies with the side and rear setback requirements for the sensitive residential interface to the north and the Merri Creek to the east. The proposal incorporates a high level of environmentally sustainable design features and initiatives into the development and offers positive energy efficiency aspects. Heritage considerations of the site have been assessed, and the proposal appropriately seeks to retain and adapt the original dwelling fronting Harrison Street, and the heritage outbuilding of most significance, the cool room, is proposed for relocation. Conditions are included to ensure appropriate reconstruction of the cool room. 6 trees are to be retained, including the native mature Moreton Bay fig tree and the native swamp she oak. Trees will be adequately protected through conditions for a tree protection management plan. Each dwelling is provided with 1 car space. The car parking reduction is appropriate, subject to condition that 2 resident bike parking spaces are provided to each new dwelling. It's recommended that a notice of decision to grant a planning permit be issued, subject to conditions, the key conditions being that the cool room setback is maximised from the existing dwelling and appropriately screened from the street, a comprehensive photographic record to detail the reconstruction of the cool room, submission of a tree management plan, and additional bike parking spaces to each dwelling. Thank you.
Thank you, Ari. We have 3 people who have 3 objectors who've indicated they wish to speak. We have Frank Paoletti. I think Frank is just getting his papers organised. After Frank, we have Peter, and then we have Nico Medic. Do we have Nico here? Yes, great.
Okay. I live approximately 700 metres from this location. I use the Merri Creek Trail quite often. I've lived in the area for about 45 years. And first thing I'd like to say is the visual impact of both Harrison Street and the Merri Creek Trail will have a massive impact. This is a low change area, minimal change, sorry, 2-storey development, but proposal 3 stories. You're basically looking at, and it's the latest proposal is basically 900 mil from one side and about just over a metre on the other. So it's increased. The footprint, the building envelope has increased, especially towards being close 5 metres from the back boundary. It'll have a big impact. And currently, you can see the adjoining building, 3 stories or with the top. It stands out, a big eyesore. So you're just continuing the run of these apartments in a minimal change area from 2 to 3, and that's got a big impact on the users, hundreds of users each day. And also the overall shadow effect on the riparian zone. The other 2 issues that I want to raise is there's 5-6 trees that are supposed to be saved. Well, 2 of them have basically, if this goes ahead, because the tree protection zone has been impinged by more than 10%, in the Australian standards that says that'll have a major impact on the longevity of these trees, both the Moreton Bay fig tree and the T7, sorry, that's a T4, the T7, which is the swamp, casuarina she oak. They're both 15 metres tall, so you can imagine their root system. So the vigorous of the tree will affect that, and the longevity will have a major impact according to the Australian standards. And the arborist says that because of the townhouse one is basically the veranda is underneath, touching the multi-stem tree, casuarina, T7, and that isn't reflected correctly. It's only shown as a single stem tree, and it's basically a 5-stem tree. And the other issue is the paving should be gravel with a 3D structure, allowing all the moisture to go to the roots, not penetrate into a paver and evaporated at a later stage. The Moreton Bay fig will be impinged by 4 metres in the tree protection zone, and also tree 3, which is the peppercorn, will affect the root zone. So there you've got 3 of the 6 trees being saved will have a massive impact. And
So Frank, if you could just come to your concluding remarks.
well, basically, considering there was 49 trees there, and now it's been reduced to, we've managed to save 6, but the lifespan of half of those is questionable, and according to Australian standards, they won't survive. And being in a sensitive,
Frank, I'm going to have
environmentally
to ask you
sensitive area,
to finish.
it's critical that we save the habitat for the black cockatoos and all the other wildlife that use it. The Moreton Bay fig feeds the flying
Thank you,
fox,
Frank. Sorry, you're
and
quite
the
over
black
time.
cockatoos use the casuarina she oak with the nuts. So it's critical that we look after them
Thank you, Frank.
and adjust the setbacks, especially townhouse 1, from the casuarina tree, the she oak.
Thanks, Frank. Peter Mollison we have up next.
Councillors, I have a double sense of deja vu here, both in the sense of following Frank and my involvement with the previous application, where we ended up at VCAT, and I had the pleasure of spending 4 days at VCAT online. So my concerns are about the creek interface, the visual dominance of the development, the loss of the existing trees, and setback from the creek. Now, the revised proposal is a significant improvement on the proposal that went to VCAT and was refused by VCAT. I appreciate the time and effort that the applicant has spent in personally briefing me about their revised proposal. They took a lot of time and effort to do that, and I thank them for that. So I've been through the revised plans. My concerns remain primarily about things like the limited setback from the creek parkland. As far as I can tell from interpreting the plans, essentially the setback hasn't increased. It's basically the same. And like 170 the Avenue, it's not as constrained as that location, but this is a section of the creek corridor where the distance between the creek and development is fairly constrained. The creek parkland is in public ownership, but it's a narrow section of the corridor. The interface has improved. So it's gone from being a car park and access way. So the previous proposal was a paved area with a very, very limited area for landscaping adjoining the boundary. The new proposal is for basically the gardens of the ground floor apartments. So that concern about the setback is probably my most important concern. I'm also concerned, as Frank said, about the impact, particularly on the large Moreton Bay fig. It's a fabulous tree, and I'm concerned about the impact that the new apartment building will have on the root growth area of that tree. So I'll finish there. So thank you very much, and hopefully it won't be a third time.
Thanks, Peter. Next up, we have Nico Merri-bek on behalf of the Russian Orthodox Church. And, sorry, Damien Ford from the Russian Orthodox Church.
Hello, everyone. Councillors, can you all hear me okay? All right, beautiful. As stated earlier, I'm here on behalf of the Russian Orthodox Church and Mr. Damien Ford, who's been taking care of this matter on behalf of the church. Unfortunately, he could not make it to this meeting, and he has sent his apologies as a result. Now, following on from what Frank and Peter have said, we would like to raise a few objections from the church's perspective and the local parishioners who attend the church. As stated by the senior urban planner, this is quite important given that the church itself is in quite close proximity with the proposed development. And I note there has been open engagement between some of the church's representatives and the applicant, and we hope that those conversations and that engagement continues in the future. So with regard to, I guess, the first objection, it does involve the Merri Creek similarly, but it's different in the sense that we're concerned about the potential impact of flooding within the Merri Creek and the impact the new development will have. And this is because the proposal involves a new fill of imported soil, and I believe that's on the eastern end of the proposed flats. This, and I'm no hydraulic expert about these processes, so perhaps an expert report would need to be prepared to address these issues. But nevertheless, this new fill, the main question of consideration is, will this new level on the eastern end of the proposed flats increase the creek's flood level and water velocity, therefore impacting the church's property? Because the part of the church that is in close proximity with the development would be our hall, and not only the hall, but also the basement underneath. And we do have potential plans to add a water board beneath that basement as well. And of course, that leads to the other question of the estimated flood level at completion of the proposed flats. So in the event that the flood level is increased, then the church's hall's basement flood protection height may also need to be increased. So some further information and perhaps an expert report addressing that issue would be greatly appreciated. And to cut it short, I also have two other objections on behalf of the church. The number of car spaces has been greatly considered, but we still argue that it's potentially insufficient given the fact that Harrison and Albion streets, they're very narrow streets, which is a problem for our parishioners at the church, given that we held many events during Saturday nights, during Sunday mornings, and we also have big events every few months, to the point that Harrison Street and Albion Street, they're narrow streets, so they get packed quite quickly, to the point that our parishioners then have to park on Nicholson Street instead. So we would likely need to engage in conversation addressing that. And I know I'm a bit over time, so to finish up, those are the two primary objections on top of the dangers of reduction of the existing trees. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nico. We now have a supporter who's indicated they wish to speak, Asanka.
Okay, so this is really similar to the last application. It's a bunch of townhouses essentially along the Merri Creek. I guess what I have to say is more or less the same thing I said as last time. It's more housing in a good location, near open space, in an even better location than the last application. So yeah, I support it and I think it's a good idea. Thank you.
Thanks, Asanka. Short and sweet. We now have the permit applicant or their representative, Michael Dunn. Welcome, Michael.
Good afternoon, good evening, Mr Mayor and councillors. We commend the officer's report to you. We think it's a very thorough report. It's a result of a lot of iterative work between ourselves and the various departments of council that have assessed the application. This project has a lot of history. It's been around before, and the revised design that has been put forward now responds to the shortcomings that were identified with the previous proposal in council's view and also in the tribunal's view. With respect to the interface with the creek, which is obviously the most sensitive interface that we're dealing with, the proposal does in fact have additional setbacks relative to the previous proposal at the upper levels, which was obviously a focus for your earlier application. In terms of that creek interface, as has been mentioned before, rather than having a car park access way and very minimal landscaping, we've now got the rear yards of these townhouses against the creek interface. So we've now providing a lot more space for landscaping within the boundary, and that will certainly soften and to a significant degree screen the development when viewed from the Merri Creek corridor. In terms of the heritage dwelling, that will be restored. We no longer have a new dwelling to the Harrison Street frontage of the site to the north of the heritage dwelling, so we've reduced the number of dwellings by one. And in terms of the rear dwellings, where also the northernmost one is only 2 stories in height, and that, if you look at the alignment of the Merri Creek Trail, that's the portion of the site that's probably most visible as you're heading along the trail. In terms of how this has been received by the community, I think the numbers are significant. There's only 21 submissions. I think some of those are that's including submissions in support of the application. We had 135 objectors last time. We've got no objections from our only neighbours, the apartment building to our immediate north, and we understand that we've actually got letters of support from those neighbours. We haven't seen them due to privacy requirements. We understand that it's a very highly sensitive location. It's obviously a constrained site. There's heritage considerations as well as the creek. So we think the design does respond appropriately to the site constraints, and it will be well screened from the Merri Creek corridor. And just to respond to the flood issue that was raised by the church representative, that certainly has been addressed. There's a cut and fill balance plan that's provided as part of the architectural drawings, and that shows that there's no net fill being placed on the site, and that's a requirement of Melbourne Water in any case. There's a condition that Melbourne Water specified so that we cannot increase the flooding on the neighbours. That's a key principle for floodplain management, and Melbourne Water has put a condition on saying that we've got to demonstrate that to them. So we don't think there's a need for a technical report, but there is certainly a need for that cut and fill balance to be submitted to Melbourne Water and to get their approval, and that would demonstrate that we're not pushing floodwaters or increasing impacts of flooding on the neighbours. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillors, are there any questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions for officers, councillors? We'll move on to seeking a motion. Is there a councillor seeking to move a motion? Councillor Bolton? Yeah.
I've got a motion, but I'd really prefer to just move an amendment to the officer's recommendation, because I will find it very heartbreaking to see, the loss of trees on this site with this development. It is quite a special site, this site, huge amount of wildlife, but in response to some of the objections, I had proposed two amendments to the officer's report. One was to increase the width of the garden bed along the rear east boundary, which is condition 1V, and also a new condition 6I, which requires consulting an arborist to oversee the surface treatments and procedures for works in proximity to Tree 4, which is the Moreton Bay fig tree.
Mayor, I'll second the motion.
Well, yes, are you moving that motion?
Yeah, that's the one I'd move, although I must admit I prefer to just amend the officer's report and then vote against the whole thing. That was what I was hoping to do. But if I had more time, I would to have worked on this. I would have preferred to actually put some other conditions on this development as well. And I do recognise that it's much improved on the proposal, which I strongly objected to whenever it came to council last. And I'm glad that proposal got knocked on the head. This is much, much better. But it is still cramming a lot of developments, a lot of flats onto the site, especially the lack of rear setbacks and the cramping of the tree that Townhouse 1 does. So I still have a lot of reservations with this development, but I would like to see an arborist oversee the surface work, because I think what's proposed for the surface with the pavers probably isn't adequate over the root zone for the Moreton Bay fig tree. And, you know, hopefully an increase in the size of the garden bed from, you know, to be increased by 1.5 or 1.8 metres will be helpful in terms of increased landscaping. But I must admit, I'm not really happy about the whole proposal. It is such a bush block and really should be part of a wildlife corridor from the creek through to Jones Park. In reality, it should be publicly acquired, in reality.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Councillor Riley.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I'd like to not see any development on the Merri Creek corridor at all, but we're dealing with post-colonial taking of Indigenous land, and we're left with that legacy, and unfortunately we're not in a position to be able to acquire the land and just take it all back and make it open space, as much as I'd like to dream on too. This is a much improved proposal. The interface on the eastern corridor with the path and the creek surrounds is much improved, because the driveway and the parking won't be there, and it'll be actually private open space, providing some buffer. And now with Councillor Bolton's amendment, it's slightly improved even further, which is, I'm happy to support that. The question of the trees, I hear what people are saying, but the arborists have given this an okay. I take it that people are disputing that, but it is a much better proposal than the last application with regard to tree retention, whilst we're still losing a lot of trees. That southwest corner with the Moreton Bay and the other trees will be hopefully kept and saved for some time at least. And then the reduced height on the homestead at the front of the house for the current site and one less townhouse is a much improved outcome for this. So while it's not exactly, it's actually an acceptable outcome is what I think in this case. And with Councillor Bolton's amendments, it's even slightly better. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Do any other councillors wish to speak to this item? We may move on to a vote. All those in favour? Okay, I can declare that carried unanimously. We'll now hear from Ari for the next steps.
Council has decided to issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit at 38 Harrison Street, Brunswick East, subject to the conditions contained within the alternative recommendation. Following the issue of the notice of decision, both the applicant and all objector parties will receive a copy of the notice of decision to grant a planning permit. Objectors will have 28 days to appeal council's decision at VCAT. In the event that no appeal is lodged at VCAT, a planning permit will be issued. If a permit is issued, the applicant has 60 days from the date of issue of the notice of decision to appeal any conditions on the permit. Thanks.
Thanks, Ari. So that's the second item on our agenda. We have two more to go. Item 5.3 is 101 Evans Street in Brunswick. Thank you to the residents who were here for the first two items. Have a good evening. 101 Evans Street. So I'll ask Vicky Liu, who's a senior urban planner, to present. Sorry, I'll ask Jack Fulson to present the report.
Thanks, Mayor, and good evening, councillors. This presentation relates to a retrospective application at 101 Evans Street in Brunswick, where retrospective approval is sought to use the land for the purpose of an indoor recreation facility and a place of assembly, and for a reduction to the standard car parking requirement. So the site's shown in pink on the screen there, and it's located on the northern side of Evans Street, approximately 70 metres west of Lygon Street. The site's occupied by an existing double-storey commercial building with access to two undercover on-site vehicle spaces achieved from Evans Street. The surrounding area is characterised by a mix of both residential and commercial buildings, ranging in height from around 1 to 5 storeys. To the west and north and south of the site, a range of single and double-storey residential dwellings, while a more mixed commercial character is evident to the east, including along to Lygon Street, where the Commercial 1 zone is located. The site itself is located in the mixed-use zone. It's affected by a number of overlays, including the Design and Development Overlay, Schedule 19, the Parking Overlay, and the Environmental Audit Overlay. The site is also found within the Brunswick Activity Centre, and this particular location has been identified as a transition residential area as per the strategic directions of the planning scheme. The proposal seeks retrospective planning approval to use the land for the purposes of an indoor recreation facility and a place of assembly. A maximum of 40 patrons are proposed to utilise services relating to dance, yoga, meditation and movement therapy classes, support groups, art and craft workshops, art therapy and reading clubs. Operating hours are proposed to run from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Monday to Sunday. Following 2 periods of public notice, a total of 11 objections have been received to date. The main issues raised by objectors generally relate to noise impacts, car parking and traffic congestion, safety, antisocial behaviour, or the potential for antisocial behaviour. A planning information and discussion meeting was held on the 10th of September and was attended by councillors, the permit applicant and 2 objectors. Key considerations relate to noise impacts, venue and patron management, car parking, and the strategic context or location of the use itself. In relation to noise impacts, the professionally prepared acoustic report submitted as part of the planning application recommends that the proposed use can achieve compliance with the state government's noise protocols, subject to the implementation of key recommendations, which generally relate to the prohibition of subwoofer speakers within the studios, the construction of all sound mitigating works shown on the proposed plans, and maximum sound pressure or volume levels identified and monitored through the installation of a decibel level meter in each studio room. Recommended permit conditions are recommended to be able to secure these, recommended permit conditions can secure these recommendations and can ensure that operators of the site manage their classes and activities in a manner that mitigate impacts relating to noise emissions. It's also recommended that permit conditions can suitably manage amenity impacts relating to venue and patron management, and this is recommended to be able to be achieved through restricting operating hours to between 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Sunday to Thursday and 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. on Friday and Saturday nights, and requiring a venue and patron management plan to be submitted to council's satisfaction. The proposed reduction to the standard car parking requirement is considered acceptable, given the site's excellent access to a range of public transport options in both the north, south and east-west direction, and the provision of 12 on-site bicycle spaces, which comfortably exceeds the planning scheme requirement of 3. Finally, the site's strategic setting within the Brunswick Activity Centre and mixed-use zone renders it an appropriate location for the proposed land uses, subject to the suitable mitigation of off-site amenity impacts, as discussed. The reuse of an existing commercial building within an area populated by other existing commercial uses is also supported. So on the balance of policies and controls within the Merri-bek planning scheme and upon review of the objections received, it's recommended that a notice of decision to grant planning permit MPS 2023-262 be issued subject to the key recommended permit conditions, generally requiring the implementation of the noise reducing recommendations set out in the acoustic report, reduced operating hours on weeknights, and the submission of a venue and patron management plan to council satisfaction. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one objector, Ben Byrne, listed to speak. Welcome, Ben.
Hi everyone, thanks for your time, and thanks Councillor Hart for your time in the planning and information and discussion meeting. My name's Ben Byrne. I'm an owner-occupier at 99 Evans Street, directly next door on the western boundary on the north side of Evans Street there to 101 Evans, where Moss Studios is located. This retrospective application's only come about because of a complaint from myself and my partner, which came after 6 months of trying to negotiate with them after they moved in fact, including using power tools after midnight around Anzac Day 2022 with installation, including after we went around and said, could you please stop? This process has been going on for 2 years now, which has involved considerable stress for us with an ongoing process now dealing with planning officers, noise diaries and so on, as I imagine is detailed. All of that said, the planning officer recommendations seem balanced and reasonable to me, with the exception of the operating hours in the evenings. To me, a 6 p.m. closing time, particularly on weekdays, would be far more appropriate. Moss Studios is located, as has been detailed, right at this interface between residential and commercial uses, the activity centre. Our bedroom and living space is a matter of metres, 2 to 5 metres, depending which way you measure from their downstairs space. The earlier closing times would address pretty much all of the objections significantly, I think. Noise, of course, parking issues, other residents that have complained are particularly concerned. Those that need to drive somewhere else to work, getting home in that early evening time and struggling to park. There's parallel complaints about parking issues in the street, obviously not for direct consideration as part of this, but it is documented that it's a street under stress as a very small, traffic can only pass one way at a time street, with apartment developments coming up on the corner, one there already, one ready to go on the south side, understandably, at Lygon Street, but nevertheless, a very stressed street. And with the issues of patrons gathering outside the venue, blockage of the street, there's only really room for one person walking down the street. So even people parking bikes, which is great to see, can impact on that amenity. That would also be helped, I think, because again, that's particularly an issue in the evening. And I will end by noting all of this really comes together with the issue that it's essentially a venue for hire. It seems that users of the venue get given a code to access it, to run different classes. The venue and patron management plan that's recommended in the officer's report includes staff training to handle patrons. There's very often no Moss Studios staff there. So it doesn't function in a way that can actually be managed through that sort of plan. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. We don't usually have questions for the objectors, but for the applicants. Yeah, thanks, Ben. So we do have two representatives of the applicant, or the applicant or the representatives. So we've got Daniel Parker and Morelli di Oliveira.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Is that okay volume-wise? My name is Daniel Parker. This is Morelli di Oliveira. We are business partners, the applicants for 101 Evans Street and ultimately the owners of Moss Studios. Again, thank you all for your time this evening. Just to give you a bit of backstory, we used to be located in an industrial area, also in the Merri-bek region, but as a result of COVID, our previous landlord had to sell, and so we were forced to move quickly and renovate our new space in order to maintain the students that we did have. For those of you who don't know, and I do apologise, I don't want to double up on what Jack has said, but Moss Studios is a place of education and mindfulness. We hold classes ranging from yoga, meditation, preschool ballet, dance, shibari, sound baths, shibari massage, among other workshops. Our students range from the age of 3 to 83. It's a multicultural, all-inclusive space. Our current facilitators are locals, they're international, interstate, members of the LGBTQI plus community and First Nations people. We have meticulously read the Council's report and we agree to all of the officer's recommendations. In fact, the majority of recommendations have already been actioned, i.e. the decibel readers, the indoor bike parking, acoustic recommendations followed. We've actually restricted access to our sound systems so that students and users of the space can't increase the volume. Just plug in their devices and play it from there. The issues raised in our application included sound and parking. We've spent substantial time and money soundproofing our studios, and at our PID, the Planning Information and Discussion evening, our main objector from 99 11th Street, Ben, actually confirmed that since his return to Melbourne, he's not had an issue with sound, so hopefully we feel as though we've rectified this problem. I'd also like to add that it's not uncommon to hear loud music played from the gardens of neighbours, not from Moss Studios. And I'd also like to add that before we took the lease of 101 Evans Street, it actually was vacant for 2 years. So when you've had no noise whatsoever for 2 years, I can understand how any kind of noise would be a bit of a distraction to you. Let's have a look. As for the parking and traffic, we have internal off-street bike parking as well as being close proximity to public transport, as previously stated. And we encourage all our students and people that use the space to use the public transport as much as possible, as well as bike where they can. I'd like to know that several of the objections highlighted during this process were actually existing issues with the street, including people using restaurants and facilities on Lygon Street and still wishing to park on Evans Street, as well as the apartment complex that's now on the corner of Evans and Lygon, which was there before we actually took on the residents there. Truthfully, we believe the only way to really control the parking on the street is to make it a permit street for the residents, but that's obviously not for this council to decide or for us to really make a say, but we're willing to help the residents if they wish to. But really, to sum it, we've done everything.
Daniel, if you could come to your conclusion.
Certainly, yes. So
Can I
we've
give my 3 minutes to him?
essentially,
yeah, okay, but yeah.
we're happy to comply with all of the conditions suggested. We would request potentially changing our opening hours from 7 till 9, from 7 till 8, till 8 until 9, so just shifting 1 hour and nothing until 10 p.m. But ultimately,
And also on the weekend.
yeah, even at weekends, we don't need it until 10 p.m. either. But other than that, we are happy to accept whatever we are offered.
It is very important for our business, for the nature of our business, that we can operate during those hours. If, as a result, if we can't, we'll be cancelling the contracts over 12 facilitators. So I'm asking you guys just to give us an opportunity to run the business and give back to the community, because this is our intention.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. So I was going to ask what the objector had asked, whether finishing at 6 p.m. would be viable, but you're saying no.
Well, to be honest, this meeting alone proves that there's a reason things happen after 5 p.m. because most people work 9 to 5, and if you want to go do an extracurricular activity, it's going to be when you finish work, which of course is between 6 and 9 p.m.
And so 8 p.m. is recommended, and you just asked for 9.
Yeah.
Is 8 p.m.
Even if we could get 8:30, already would make a massive difference for us. Ideally, we wanted to be there until 9 o'clock, but if we could be 8:30 already, would make an entire world of a difference.
And would but given 8 o'clock is in the conditions, is that?
We could operate till 8 p.m. That's not a problem, but we would have to let a couple of our classes go, and therefore a few of our teachers.
So our rent, it's quite expensive in this area. So our regular teachers and our regular classes is what actually helps us to cover the rent. We've been on this waiting room where we haven't been able to expand the business. Our intention is to have our own teachers,
and we choose what type of classes we can run. But until we have a permit, we're just waiting to see if we will be able to continue doing the work we're doing at the studio. So that 8 o'clock timings will, because one of the things that they asked was to have a 15 minutes gap between each class.
Can you speak into the mic, please?
Sorry. One of the things was to have a 15 minutes gap in between each class. So that means if people are coming to the studio at 6 o'clock and we only have until 8 o'clock and we have 15 minutes in between, you technically can only run a 2 45 minutes class. My commitment to the community, my commitment to Ben and to everyone from the Evans Street is that continue working, continue like doing anything we can. I've been going through so much emotional stress, and it's been 2.5 years, and all I really want is the opportunity to run the business after COVID, because after COVID finished, everyone started raising and everything started being good, but then we had to move, and since then we've just been going on this journey. And for what Ben said, for the first 6 months, we were in absolute panic. We didn't know what to do. We were scared of losing our business, our clients, our teachers. So for the 6 months, me and him, we only worked like only 12 hours every day.
I don't want to use power tools after midnight. It was through necessity rather than, just for the fun of it.
Sorry, cool. I have one more question, and I think Councillor Riley's got his, and Councillor Hart as well. So the objector spoke about there not being any staff on site, and then how that would relate to the venue management plan?
In the evenings, we always have a staff on site. If it's not me, it's DJ, and we have a studio caretaker. I think it's very difficult for Ben to say that there's no staff member on site where there is a staff member on site. And I would be happy to open the doors of the studio for inspection, for you to see the work we've done, also to see what is the guest commitment we have with everyone. Everyone comes to the studio, they have to sign commitment, is a guest commitment, saying 4 things. 1, they're not going to be speaking outside after classes. 2, no loitering in front of neighbor's house. 3, mindful parking. And 4, respecting the neighborhoods and everyone around. So this is the things we can do to show that we are listening and we wanted to improve. Now, the first 6 months, I personally was in depression because I lost everything. So I was trying to keep my mind still so I could do the things I needed to do, but that's what I had then. And if I have an opportunity now, I can do so much more for the community and for Evans Street itself. I was even considering offering free classes for anyone that lives in Evans Street, just as an exchange.
Thank you, that's okay. Councillor Riley.
Yep, thank you. Look, my question is about the training. I understand now. It's good to know that after, if you just clarify what time you will staff it in the evenings, that would be good. But what training is provided for the instructors, people using the space during the office hours? That would be useful, please.
Yeah, so any user of MOS is given a full induction on, obviously, 1, how the space works, but more importantly, how to maintain a peaceful environment.
And how do the neighbours know how to complain to you if they're not happy? Like, will you have signage, or where will there be one person that those complaints go to? How will you manage that under the plan?
I have suggested to have a QR code at the front of the building so they can just scan and send us a message or call us directly in our MOS phone so we can address the issues as they come.
But also all of our contact details are on our website, email address, phone numbers. There's multiple ways of getting in touch with us if people wish to.
Thanks. And Councillor Hart?
Yeah, my questions were very similar, and it's about how you implement and the strategies. Because I noticed your comment about there's music anyway from other properties, but that's very different, and to having consistent sound that penetrates into neighbours' yards on a very regular basis. And I guess our council role is really to protect residents, to allow business to be flexible. So that ability to have the monitoring on site by your own staff is actually really critical. So that's my question, was also wanting to really understand how that was going to occur. And I think council's had a fair bit of time to really consider both sides, and officers haven't come up with a recommendation for 8:30. So they've actually sought to be, and I hear what Ben was saying about 6 o'clock. I can understand why he was saying that, but I know you also produced an argument that some of your classes need people to attend after work time. So I think council officers have tried to reach some balance here.
Yeah.
Not one that I don't think we want to push too much.
And if that's what the council suggests, then so be it, of course.
Our room downstairs is absolutely soundproof. The room upstairs is partially soundproof, and with more income, we will be able to soundproof the space more. At the meeting that we had, Ben said that he haven't had any issues with sound. So in terms of what happens inside of the studio, I can 100% say then we will take care of sound. And for the people then they will be coming out of the studio, all of the staff members have training, and I'm happy to send to you guys what we ask each person then comes to us, then they sign and they agree on. We have already canceled agreements with a few different teachers that have not followed the rules. Now, the only thing I can do is cancel an agreement and don't have that person there, but I need the neighbors to be more aware that we are trying our best and that we are open for suggestions so we can improve the residency more.
Thank you. Are there any final questions for the applicants? Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Do you have a question?
Yeah,
or?
I'd like to have to move the motion.
Okay. Yeah, all good. You can return to your seats. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.
So, Councillor Riley.
Yeah, look, I'd like to move the officer recommendation, but I'm going to also include extending the open hours to 8:30 as a compromise. That's,
Okay.
if I get
So
a
we'll just get
seconder.
that on the screen.
I'm happy to second that.
Yeah, so we're just going to get it changed to 8:30 on the screen, which is what Councillor Riley's moving. So that's from Monday to Thursday.
That's it. Keep the weekends as they are. I'll just speak to this briefly. Look, thank you for the objectors' concerns. I'm hearing that. Ben, did you just say you actually manage the other property on the other side of this, or you just live on the west side? Do you have a business as well, or? Oh, sorry, I misunderstood. Yeah. So thanks, Ben, for your raising those. I'm hoping. Look, I know that this probably won't satisfy you necessarily, but I am hoping that the management plan will address it. And given the nature of this business, the type of people, they're not coming out of the property drunk like they will be around the corner. We deal with these, and we've dealt with the number, and I copped it in the very last planning meeting 4 years ago about the karaoke. And in fact, my recommendation to get a soundproof door ended up going through after the business abused me, actually. So I'm just very proud to stand here that they actually did input that sound lock in there, and they are still running. They're more likely to cause you more grief, and I live in your area, and we have to put up with people coming up past our property, which is not too dissimilar in relation to Lygon Street from where you are, especially in the summertime when you have your windows open. However, this is a different group of people. They're not drinking and eating, and if they are managing the people and training the users, I would think that 8:30 of a weeknight seems relatively reasonable. It's a compromise.
We've just lost quorum.
Oh, sorry.
So, sorry, we're just going to have to interrupt that. We'll note that Councillor Riley had spoken for a minute. We'll just chase up our quorum. Sorry, everyone. We just have to briefly adjourn while we get quorum. So we'll just see if we can get quorum. So yeah, so we'll probably just adjourn for 5 minutes. So Yeah, that's okay. We'll come back in about 5 minutes, and councillors encourage you to use this to do whatever you need. Hi, everybody. Great. So anyone listening online at home, we just had to briefly adjourn as we lost quorum. We've got quorum again, so we're continuing our meeting. Councillor Riley had moved a motion and had been speaking for a minute, so we'll pick up from where we left off, and thanks everybody for their patience.
Thanks. So just with regard to extending the hours for the weeknights, not Friday and Saturday, the other consideration here is the fact that there is a 15-minute gap between sessions, which does eat into the potential for revenue for this business. So that condition alone has a major impact. I think another half hour doesn't probably pick up all of those 15-minute gaps. Ideally, I would actually be proposing 9, but because I haven't had a chance to talk to Ben and check with the other neighbours, I think 8:30 is a reasonable compromise. And that doesn't preclude you coming back, if things work out, to seek an extension at some other time. But tonight, I'm proposing 8:30, basically because it's a really benign business and it's actually hoping to provide the sorts of things that we want to see in a mixed-use zone. Otherwise, I think the sound levels and the other things and the other problems that Ben alluded to have been sorted out, I hope, and hopefully we can manage it over time. I think you'll find that we're pretty good at delivering these venue management plans, Ben, and they're a good way to actually get direct feedback going in so the owners and managers can sort them through. Not going to say it's always going to be perfect, but you won't be having rock festivals or drunken people coming out of the venue. So at least that's a good starting point. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Councillor Panopoulos, a seconder?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Just very briefly, I'm quite happy to be speaking in favour of this slightly amended motion before us. I think, as Councillor Riley has said, this timing and the whole permit itself acknowledges, I guess, the reality of the kinds of business that's operating, and the fact that it is like yoga and mindfulness and these sorts of uses. It's something that is a bit more sensitive to the site, and I think is actually quite appropriate for somewhere that is just off of Lygon Street. It's well serviced by public transport, acknowledging that there are those issues with the parking, and that is like a separate process that can be looked into separate to what we're discussing tonight. And also, we talk a lot about supporting local and small businesses, and we know that that they have been hit quite hard during and post-COVID and having to move with different rent, with the rents increasing, and fewer people signing up to do classes due to the cost of living and people having to tighten up what they spend their own money on. I think that this is a sensible compromise that aims to address some of the concerns raised, and as well with the noise the noise in the venue and patron management plan. I think it's an appropriate response that helps facilitate this kind of business that we do want to see in this area, whilst also addressing some of the valid concerns that have been raised by the nearby residents. So I'm quite happy to be speaking in favour of this and to hopefully see this flourish, and to hopefully also have many nearby residents going and using this business.
Thank you, Councillor Panopoulos. Do any other councillors wish to speak to this item? We might move on to a vote. All those in favour? And I can declare that carried unanimously. Thank you to everybody who came along for that item. We'll go to Jack for the next steps.
Thank you, Mayor. The Council has decided to issue a notice of decision for the application before it tonight, subject to the conditions contained in the alternative recommendation. So next steps are for tomorrow or the next day, a notice of decision to grant a planning permit to be issued. Following the issue of the notice of decision, the applicant, all objector parties will be provided with a copy of the notice of decision and will be provided with 21 days to appeal Council's decision at VCAT. Following, if no objections are lodged with the tribunal, then a planning permit will issue, and the permit applicant will have 60 days to lodge an appeal on any conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. We're on to the last item for this evening, which is item 5.4, 20 Linder Grove in Brunswick East. So we'll invite Esha up to introduce the report.
Thank you, Mayor. All right. Good evening, everyone. This presentation relates to a proposal for a multi-storey mixed-use development comprising dwellings, removal of an easement, and reduction to the standard car parking requirement at 20 Linder Grove in Brunswick East. The proposal is subject to a current VCAT review process, with Council required to formalise a position ahead of a major cases hearing starting in December. Shown in a pink border, the site is located at the northern end of Linder Grove, a dead-end street running in a north-south direction with access from Jarvis Street to the south. The site was formerly part of a larger parcel of land that fronted Lygon Street, which is this part here. Sorry, moving too fast. Which is now developed with a multi-storey apartment building. At the same time, a carriageway easement from Lygon Street to Linder Grove was created, which is shown in that pink border, as a public benefit, providing increased pedestrian permeability and access to Medhaven Park, located to the southeast of the site. There are residential properties occupying the south and east of the subject site, which are in the neighbourhood residential zone, and to the north we have a mixture of commercial and residential properties. So the site is in the mixed-use zone and is affected by the Design and Development Overlay Schedule 19, the Parking Overlay and the Environmental Audit Overlay. The site is found within the Brunswick Activity Centre and has been identified for significant housing growth as per the strategic directions of the planning scheme. The DDA 19 sets out a preferred maximum building height of 17 metres, which is between 5 to 6 stories, and seeks to provide a transition in building height from Lygon Street to the west to the adjoining low-rise residential areas to the south and the east. The application before us is for a construction of a multi-storey development comprising 2 building masses ranging in height from 9 stories to 8 stories, which is between 26 metres to 23 metres. The storage does include mezzanine levels, which will be used for car parking. A total of 141 apartments are proposed, with 118 car parking spaces proposed over 3 mezzanine levels, and they are providing 100 bicycle parking spaces, and they're also seeking to remove the easement. VCAT has required the applicant to undertake further public notice of the application by 21st of October, which was yesterday. The applicant did initially serve the VCAT application for review, which resulted in 6 objector parties to have joined the proceeding. They've raised the following concerns relating to build form, visual bulk, equitable development opportunities for properties to the north of the site, car parking, traffic, overshadowing, and the extent of notice. With regards to the key considerations, the proposal, there are many concerns with the proposal, firstly relating to inappropriate building height and visual bulk impact. The proposal as proposed does not satisfy the DDO 19 objective of achieving a transition from Lygon Street to the sensitive residential interface to the east and south and the park. There is inadequate building separation and external amenity impact by way of visual bulk and overshadowing. There is unacceptable overshadowing to the park. There are concerns raised in internal amenity. There's concerns with the environmentally sustainable development, with the proposal only proposing 6.5 NATIS rating, and the removal of carriageway easement is also an issue. It is recommended that council submission to VCAT be not to support the application based on the following reasons, which is primarily the building height, which fails to provide the transition, the unreasonable amenity impacts, unacceptable internal amenity for future occupants considering ESD performance and daylight. Removal of easement does not align with the Brunswick structure plan intent to provide a key pedestrian link. Council officers would like to present an alternate officer recommendation. There's been amended plans which were circulated yesterday on 21st of October as per VCAT order, where the officers now recommend the deletion of a refusal ground 4A relating to proposal not complying with the accessibility standard in clause 58. The amended plans now show compliance with this standard by providing 50% accessible apartments. There's no other change to the officer recommendation, which continues to be not to issue a permit, and there's no other changes to the refusal grounds. Thank you.
Thank you, Asha. We have two objectors who've indicated they wish to speak. Glenda Laslett. Do we have Glenda? Oh, okay. So yes, we've got Glenda online. So Glenda, if you're listening to the live stream, you might just need to mute that live stream before you unmute yourself and talk. Otherwise, we'll hear a weird echo. Oh, sorry. Glenda, you might need to, if you're listening to our live stream, you might need to mute that and then unmute yourself, and you've got 3 minutes to speak to your objection. I think, Glenda, can you hear me? Yes, great. So, no, I think, yes, exactly. Sorry, Glenda, you're still on mute. So, if you can unmute, yeah.
Yep, it's go.
Great, go ahead. Go ahead. You've got 3 minutes.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak. This application for a site that is classified as part of the Lygon Street Activity Centre actually has no direct link to the activity centre. Instead, it depends on vehicle, bicycle and pedestrian access through small local streets, Linder Grove, which is basically a one-way street, and then Jarvie Street before accessing Lygon Street. The application will have a significant and negative impact on traffic in Linder Grove and Jarvie Street, with risk of congestion and increased collisions with vehicles, bicycles and pedestrians in Linder Grove especially. It means increased parking pressure on parking in Linder Grove and Jarvie Street. It will make it difficult for emergency vehicles as well. The visual bulk of the two-tower development, overshadowing, lack of sunlight, increased traffic and risk to children, dogs and cyclists entering and leaving the park will mean a negative impact on Methven Park. The application will also create overshadowing and reduction of solar access to my house at 11 Linder Grove, impacting on solar energy panel installation and use. So what does it matter if there is more traffic on Linder Grove and Jarvie Street? As the developer's own traffic report admits, Linder Grove is effectively a one-way street for much of the time because of the parking on the western side and a very narrow road. They forecast that there will be 255 vehicle movements a day in both directions, but this figure does not include, visitors to the 141 apartments, 100 resident bicycles, delivery vehicles and tradies. There are no passing bays on Linder Grove. Parking is allowed on the western side and nothing is possible on the other side. I've lived in Linder Grove for 40 years. Previously, factories and warehouses on the site had access to Lygon Street through 260 Lygon Street. The exception was when COVID occurred and there was a testing station on the site. Then many vehicles were trying to access the site through one-way Linder Grove, causing a rapid build-up of traffic congestion at peak times. Traffic management had needed to be introduced due to the delays caused to the tram network along Lygon Street. Clearly, the proposal as it stands will ensure traffic congestion in Linder Grove. This greatly increased traffic along Linder Grove will negatively impact residents, of course, but more importantly, it will reduce enjoyment of Methven Park by users from throughout the neighbourhood due to increased traffic, noise, pollution, increased difficulty of crossing to the park at the Jarvie Street end, and increased risks to children, cyclists, older people and dogs near the Linder Grove edge of the park. There are several ways to reduce the traffic chaos and danger. One is reduce the number of dwellings in the development, make it smaller and lower. Reduce the height of the development to 17 metres or 5 stories in line with DDO 19. Keep the easement from 20 Linder Grove to Lygon Street, enabling entrance and exit in one direction only.
Glenda, if you could just come to your concluding remarks. Sorry, you're just over time.
Okay, sure. Look, we're not opposed to the development of apartments at 20 Linder Grove. People need places to live and owners naturally expect to invest in this potential. Much of Brunswick's lively character is due to the presence of people in modern apartments and townhouses, but developments need to be well planned. That's it. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Glenda. We have one more objector who's listed to speak, Stuart Fish. Stuart, Do we have Stuart with us? Great. Welcome, Stuart. If you're listening to the live stream, you'll just need to mute that before you unmute yourself. So, and then when you're unmuted, your 3 minutes will begin.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, great. Go ahead.
Okay. Look, thank you for from hearing from me. I own 3 titles directly north of the site on Albert Street. We're counting for about 45% of the northern boundary of this site. The site I've got there is about a combined area of over 1,500 square metres. It's north facing, it's got great access to Albert Street. So it's got future development potential. And my neighbour directly due west of me has got another 2,000 square metres. So between us, about 3/4 of an acre. So similar, but not quite as large as the site that's being proposed for development. One issue with our sites, I'll just explain why I'm appearing. One issue with our sites is that our sites will always need to have a commercial component, even under the new activity centre zoning that you're proposing. That's highly likely given the history of the sites. But what that means, I think we all understand, is that the development economics of our sites are going to be somewhat challenged, certainly by comparison with the applicant's site. So the reason that I wanted to speak to you is that the applicants, I too support development of his site. It's an attractive site and I'm sure it will make great living for a lot of people. But the applicant has chosen not to provide for the amenity of his future development from within the amenity of his own site, despite it being a very large site. So his proposal is unfair in that he's proposing to separate his building from our buildings. He's proposing to set back from the boundary by 6 metres. I'm sure you're familiar, and it's certainly pointed out in the officer's report, that above a height of 12 metres, he needs to step back 9 metres. So these positions are put there, as you would know better than me, to provide for sufficient separation between future developments. The reality is that our sites can provide a lot of amenity for future residents, but they're unlikely to be developed, or certainly they're going to be delayed, if we have to basically step back a further 3 metres, as the applicant has suggested in responding to council queries on this matter, to provide him extra amenity. I'd like to see his development go ahead. I just need him to back it into his own site and develop it entirely within its own amenity. The reason I wanted to raise this lastly is to say that I recognise this is going to go to VCAT, and I recognise that there are a lot of concerns with this development, but I just think it would be appropriate for council to point out to VCAT that not only does this development application have leverage over the 140 odd residences that are proposed, it actually has quite a similar leverage over a similar number of residences that would be developed due north of the site between ourselves and the neighbour in the future. And I think that's an important consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. We'll probably boot you out of the Zoom room, but you can continue following the live stream at home.
Thank you.
So, so we have no representative from the applicant. They haven't even bothered to come and speak to us. So we will now seek a motion. Councillor Riley, you've got your hand up.
Happy to move the officer recommendation.
Yeah, and so just noting that there's a slight
amendment
about 4A being deleted.
Yes, that's the one.
And
Thanks.
Councillor Bolton's happy to second. So Councillor Riley.
Thanks, Councillor Bolton. Yeah, look, thank you to Glenda and Stuart for your presentations. Stuart, you raised some really good points around the mixed-use nature of this site. This is probably one of the worst applications I've seen in my 8 years on council, and I've seen some bad ones. So it is way less than acceptable, and I really thank the officers for their detailed work on this. You know, we have set up and gone to the trouble of trying to raise the bar by setting up a design excellence scorecard, and this goes way below anything that comes close to it. So 6.5 stars of environmental sustainable design under the NATA's scheme is really low for a site this big and of this value. It should be at least 7 and should probably really be 7.5 stars, given we're headed to 2 degrees of global warming. It's a tragedy. The adaptable nature of the apartments and the lack of accessibility at 11% is just, woeful. The 9 metre extra height that they're seeking, we might consider a story, but 2, when you're not giving anything to the community, you're not giving anything to commercial nature, and you're trying to rob us of a access to Lygon Street, which is actually required under the permits for this site, that you actually give pedestrian access. So this developer is missing on so many scores and points. It's just really unreasonable and really unacceptable. Our design standards for internal amenity, Merri-bek set the standards. The Victorian government followed up and didn't quite meet our standards, but they don't even come close to that. So look, the list goes on and on. Glenda covered a lot of it, and really thank the officers for their work on this. This is just a shocker, and this is really a nice site, given its proximity to the Methven Park, and the overshadowing and the bulkiness of that in relation to that park. And gosh, I know about Methven Park, because when you tried to put a toilet there a few years ago, in the first year of my council, we learned that you don't just put a toilet in the middle of the park. You have to very carefully locate it so that everyone's happy, and I'm glad people are very happy with that. But this building is not something we want to see come about, and especially something of this value and impact. So we do want to get people living there, hopefully people working and transacting there as well, but not under something like this. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Councillor Bolton, as seconder.
I think, what council should be saying at VCAT is go away and prepare new plans, basically. This doesn't fly. I won't repeat all of the points that Councillor Riley made, but it's non-compliant in so many ways. And we actually, as the first objector said, we actually need well-planned developments, not developments that are going to cause problems. And, even just going to the overshadowing of Methven Park, which I also remember Methven Park, when the council decided to plonk a public toilet on the only piece of winter sunshine in that park. And so, okay, people made jokes about it, but the reality is people wanted to preserve their patch of sunlight in winter, because it was the only patch of sunlight in that park as a heritage park. And so to actually, to destroy even that little patch of sunlight would be a real travesty for the surrounding people. I think this development is setting things up for a nightmare for everyone who lives there, both new residents of the apartments plus people who live there currently, and they just simply need to go away and do something better.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Do any other councillors wish to speak to this item? I want to briefly speak and just say, so this proposal is seeking to, usually we have our highest developments along the main strips, the activity corridors or the transport routes. And so this development actually proposes, it's 1 block back behind Lygon Street, but proposes going up above that. So we'd actually be stepping up rather than stepping down to the park and to other residential development. So that's clearly not what we're aiming to do. That's a big red flag. But we heard in the second application tonight for 38 Harrison Street that the applicant had been speaking to local community members. The applicant had been speaking to planning officers. They'd really treated people with respect. And really that's probably the base we should expect of applicants, but it is also dealing with our community with respect. And this applicant can't even face us now when we're making a decision. And not even that. Beforehand, when they've lodged this application, our officers have asked for further information. They've seemingly obfuscated or just delayed, and then gone straight to VCAT saying we didn't fulfill our obligations as a decision-making body when they didn't provide the information we needed to be able to make a decision. So from the proposal itself to the way that they've handled their application to not even being here tonight and facing the community, they don't deserve, there's no credit that they deserve, and I think Councillor Bolton is 100% right when they need to go back to the drawing board. So I'm really pleased with council officers' work on this, and thank you to the residents who've spoken up as well. We deserve better, and I hope that this applicant gets that message. Do any other councillors wish to speak to this item? No. Okay, we'll move on to a vote. All those in favour? And I can declare that carried unanimously. Great, we'll move on to Esha telling us the next steps.
Thank you, Mayor. Council has decided that a submission to VCAT be that no planning permit be issued for the application at 20 Linder Grove on the grounds contained within the alternative officer recommendation. With regards to the next step, as outlined, the application is listed for major cases hearing starting from 10th of December, where VCAT will be responsible for making the final decision on this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esha. So that brings us to the end of this planning and related matters meeting. Thank you to the residents who've come along and who are following online at home. Thank you to the officers for making this evening run smoothly. There's also a whole team of AV people that people can't see who are working hard at making sure meetings run smoothly. And this is the final formal thing of this term of council. So just wanted to acknowledge that. Thank councillors. Thank you particularly, Councillor Yildiz, for making sure we've got quorum tonight, even when there's other things going on. And I would declare this meeting closed at 9:19. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.